Stay with me! Hey, stay with me! Her knees hit the tile, alarms screaming, and the man catching her didn't know her name, only that if he let go, she might not breathe again. Aaliyah Brooks had learned how to disappear while standing right in front of people. 12-hour shifts did that to you. You moved fast, spoke soft, carried pain you weren't allowed to set down. On the cardiac floor at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, Aaliyah was known for steady hands and a calm voice, especially when families unraveled. That Tuesday night, Washington, D.C. hummed outside the windows. Sirens stitched the air. Inside, Aaliyah checked a monitor, adjusted a drip, smiled at a man who reminded her of her father. She hadn't eaten since dawn. Her feet burned. She told herself she'd sit in 5 minutes. She always said 5 minutes. She never made it. Across town, Grant Holloway stood in the glassy quiet of a boardroom overlooking K Street, watching the city blink. He owned half the view. At least that's what people joked. Defense contracts, clean energy, data centers. He signed papers with a pen he didn't remember buying. People called him decisive. They didn't call him lonely, but he was. Grant had been on his way out when his chest tightened. Not pain, something else. A memory he didn't invite. His sister's laugh in a hospital hallway years ago, before the machines took over the talking. He shook it off, grabbed his coat, told his driver to take the long way. Traffic slowed near Irving Street. Red lights, blue lights. An ambulance screamed past, then another. Grant leaned forward, a habit he'd picked up since learning leaning didn't change outcomes. Inside, MedStar. The floor tilted. Aaliyah reached for the counter and missed. The room narrowed to a tunnel. Someone called her name. Too far away. The last thing she felt was the cold tile kissing her cheek and the awful embarrassment of being the problem instead of the solution. "Hey! Hey!" Grant's voice cut through, unpolished, urgent. He'd stepped into the hospital to ask directions after seeing a woman stagger through the automatic doors. She wore scrubs. She looked strong. Then she wasn't. Instinct took over. He caught her before she fell all the way, one arm under her shoulders, the other bracing her head like he'd done it 100 times. He hadn't. "Call a code!" someone yelled. "I've got her," Grant said, though he didn't know if that was true. Aaliyah's lashes fluttered. "I'm okay," she tried, the lie small and brave. "You're not," Grant said, softer now. "I've got you." They moved fast then. Gurney, lights, questions fired like bullets. Grant stayed where he was told not to. He watched the nurses work with a reverence he didn't know he had. He noticed Aaliyah's name stitched on her pocket. He said it once, under his breath, like a promise. "Who are you to her?" a nurse asked. "I'm—" Grant stopped. He didn't know. He said the truth. "I was there." That was enough. Later, when the hallway quieted and the coffee went cold, Grant sat with his hands folded, staring at the closed curtain. He should have left. He didn't. Something about the way she'd trusted him with her weight, her life, stuck in his chest. Inside the bay, Aaliyah came to with a headache and a familiar shame. Nurses weren't supposed to fall. Nurses held people up. She heard a man's voice ask if she was awake, careful, like he didn't want to scare her. She turned her head, met his eyes. He smiled like someone relieved to still be standing. Outside, D.C. kept moving. Inside, 2 lives had brushed past each other at the wrong moment, or the only moment that mattered. Welcome back to Tales of the Fireplace Family. Here we share stories that remind us of one truth. Love and loss touch every soul, no matter who we are. We never know when, how, or why, but love always finds us, and its stories deserve to be told. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the moments that change everything. And to our returning hearts, thank you. Your presence keeps this fire burning. Stay with us till the end. Share your thoughts, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Let us continue. Aaliyah woke to the sound of her own name being said carefully like glass. Aaliyah! She opened her eyes and stared at a ceiling she knew too well. The smell of antiseptic. The low murmur of voices just outside the curtain. For a split second, panic flared. I'm late. I missed something. Someone needed me. Then the memory rushed back, hot and humiliating. She tried to sit up. A hand lifted instinctively to stop her. Easy, the man said, the same voice from before, steady, close. She turned her head. He was still there, jacket folded over a chair, tie loosened, like he'd been sitting longer than planned. Not a doctor, not staff, just present. I'm fine, she said out of habit. He didn't argue. He just nodded, like he understood what that sentence usually meant and how rarely it was true. They said dehydration, exhaustion, low blood sugar. Aaliyah closed her eyes. Of course it was, the unglamorous kind of breaking. The kind that came from putting yourself last so often your body stopped asking politely. I shouldn't be here, she whispered. I was on shift. You were, he said, and then you weren't. She laughed once, dry and embarrassed. That's not supposed to happen. Maybe, he said. But it did. Silence settled between them, not awkward, just heavy, the kind that made room for things neither of them said out loud. She studied his hands. Strong. A faint scar near his thumb. Hands that looked used to control, not catching strangers on hospital floors. You didn't have to stay, she said. I know. But you did. He hesitated, then shrugged, like the truth surprised even him. I needed to know you were okay. That landed somewhere deep in her chest. A stranger caring without asking what it cost. A nurse peeked in, gave Aaliyah a look that said we'll talk later, then glanced at the man. Family? No, Aaliyah said quickly. He waited a beat. Not family, he agreed. When they were alone again, she exhaled. Thank you. For catching me. For not leaving. He stood. I'm Grant. Aaliyah. I know. That made her smile despite herself. They talked in fragments, not resumes, not achievements, just pieces. He told her he'd been driving past, seen her stumble, followed a feeling he usually ignored. She told him she'd picked up an extra shift because someone else needed the night off. She didn't say she always did that. She didn't say she lived alone in a one-bedroom in Brooklyn with a fridge that hummed too loud. She didn't say she was tired of being strong. Grant didn't say billionaire, didn't say company names. He said he worked too much, that quiet apartments echoed, that hospitals made him uneasy. When the doctor cleared her to rest and drink fluids, Grant stood again unsure. I should go. Aaliyah felt the room tilt. Not physically this time, but emotionally. Something had sparked in the quiet. Not romance, recognition. You don't have to, she said before she could stop herself. He searched her face. I don't want to make this strange. She smiled faintly. Too late? They shared a small laugh. Human, relieving. He stayed another 20 minutes. Long enough for the IV to finish. Long enough for Aaliyah to feel like herself again. When he finally left, he paused at the curtain. Rest, he said. Let someone else hold things together tonight. After he was gone, Aaliyah stared at the ceiling, heart full and unsettled. She thought about how easily she'd fallen, how easily he'd caught her, how rare it felt to be seen at the moment you were weakest. And if this moment is stirring something in you, the way it did in her, if you've ever held yourself together until you couldn't anymore, maybe stay with this story. Not because it asks you to, but because some moments deserve witnesses. Outside, Grant walked to his car slower than usual. He hadn't planned to meet anyone. He hadn't planned to care. Yet the image of her collapsing replayed in his mind, not the fear, but the trust, the way she'd leaned into his arms without knowing his name. He drove off into the D.C. night knowing one thing clearly. Whatever this was, he wasn't done with it. Aaliyah went back to work 3 days later, moving slower, pretending she wasn't. The floor welcomed her with the same noise and urgency it always had, like nothing had happened. That was the rule. You collapsed, you recovered, you showed up again. No one wanted the story, just the hands. She kept expecting to see him. She told herself that was ridiculous. He was a stranger. A kind one, yes, but still a stranger who had wandered into a bad moment and then back out of it. D.C. was full of men like that, passing through, leaving impressions like fingerprints that faded by morning. Still, every time the doors slid open, her eyes lifted. Grant Holloway returned to his life with the precision of a man who believed control was a form of safety. Meetings stacked. Calls overlapped. Decisions were made in elevators and hallways. He told himself the hospital incident had been an interruption, a human pause, nothing more. But at night, when the city quieted, he replayed it. The way her body had gone slack, the way she'd tried to apologize while barely conscious. He'd funded wings and wards in hospitals across the country. He'd never stayed long enough to know what it felt like inside them. He found himself driving past MedStar once. Then again. He didn't go in. He just sat at the light, watching ambulances come and go, feeling something unproductive tug at him. Aaliyah heard her co-workers whisper before anyone said it outright. "Are you okay?" "You scared us." "Don't do that again." As if exhaustion were a choice. She nodded, smiled, promised she'd eat better. She didn't mention the man who stayed. She didn't mention how being caught had cracked something open. Vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. Nurses who needed saving didn't last. On Friday evening, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. "Grant here. I hope this isn't crossing a line." She stared at the screen longer than necessary. Her thumb hovered. Then she typed, "Hi." That was it. One word. But her chest tightened like she'd just stepped onto ice. They didn't talk about feelings. They talked about safe things. How she was feeling. How long his meetings ran. He asked if she was eating. She asked if he slept. They laughed about the ridiculousness of both. Still, there was restraint. Distance measured in texts, not sent. Questions held back. Grant suggested coffee, then added, "No pressure." Aaliyah read it twice. She thought about her scrubs folded at home, about the mirror she avoided, about how easy it would be to say no. "Maybe," she wrote, "not yes, not no." Work intervened. A patient crashed, another coded. Time bent. By the time Aaliyah checked her phone again, it was midnight. Grant had written, "Another time." Relief and disappointment tangled together. Days passed. The connection thinned but didn't break. Something kept them circling the edge without stepping in. Grant told himself he didn't date women whose lives he could disrupt. Aaliyah told herself men like him didn't stay. Then a complication forced their paths closer. Grant's aunt, his last living family, was admitted to MedStar. Heart issues, non-negotiable. Grant arrived in a tailored coat, eyes alert, armor back in place. Aaliyah walked into the room with a chart and froze. They looked at each other across the bed, recognition flickering, quick, contained, professional. "Mr. Holloway," she said, steady. "I'll be your aunt's nurse tonight." Grant nodded. "Nurse Brooks?" Nothing more, but the air changed. All night, their conversation stayed clipped, necessary, controlled. Yet every glance carried what they weren't saying. Grant watched her work, how she spoke gently to his aunt, how she explained without condescension, how her presence calmed the room. Aaliyah felt his eyes when he thought she didn't. She resented it. She welcomed it. They were too close now. Bound by circumstance, neither had chosen, and both of them knew. Avoiding each other had been easier when they weren't standing in the same room. pretending they hadn't already caught one another at the worst possible moment. Grant's aunt slept through most of the night, her breathing shallow but steady. The room dimmed to that soft hospital half-light where everything felt more honest. Aaliyah adjusted the monitors, checked the IV, moved with the quiet confidence that came from years of practice. Grant watched from the chair by the window. "You do that like it matters," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "It does." When she stepped out to chart, he followed. Far enough to speak, not close enough to cross a line. The hallway smelled like coffee and disinfectant. A stretcher rolled past, someone laughing too loudly somewhere down the corridor. "She trusts you," he said. "My aunt. She calms down when you're here." Aaliyah capped the pen. "That's my job." "That's not all it is." She finally met his eyes. "Careful." He held her gaze. "I am." They stood there, words stacked between them. He wanted to ask how she really was. She wanted to ask why he kept showing up in her orbit. Neither did. Later, as dawn thinned the dark, Grant stepped out to take a call. His voice dropped into that tone, measured, commanding. Aaliyah didn't mean to listen, but his name carried. So did the numbers. So did the respect in the voice on the other end. She felt it before she understood it. Holloway. She searched the name on the chart later, heart sinking as clarity rushed in. That Holloway. The one on the news. The one with the buildings. The one who funded half the city's quiet machinery. Aaliyah's chest tightened. Of course. When he came back in, coffee in hand, she was already pulling away, professional wall sliding into place. "Your aunt's stable," she said. "The doctor will update you soon." He noticed the shift. "Did I do something?" She shook her head. "No, I just didn't realize." "Realize what?" She looked at him then, eyes steady but distant. "Who you are." He exhaled slowly. "Does that change things?" "It explains them," she said. "Why you can stay, why you don't worry about time. That's not fair." "Neither is pretending this is equal," she replied, voice low. "I collapse on a shift and go back to work. You collapse and the city moves around you." The words hung between them, sharp and true. Grant swallowed. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to matter." "But it does," she said, softer now. "To me." She stepped back, returning to the room. He stayed in the hall, jaw tight, watching her retreat into professionalism like a shield. That morning, his aunt woke long enough to squeeze Aaliyah's hand. "You're good people," she whispered. Aaliyah smiled, but her eyes burned. At the end of the shift, Grant waited by the elevators. "Let me take you home," he said. "Please." She shook her head. "I need space." He nodded, respecting it even though it hurt. As the elevator doors closed, Aaliyah stared at her reflection. She felt foolish for forgetting the gap between their worlds, for letting herself believe being caught meant being held. If this moment feels heavy, if you've ever pulled away because caring felt dangerous, maybe stay with this story a little longer. Some choices are made to survive, but they leave bruises you don't see right away. Outside, Grant watched the doors shut and felt something crack. Power had never failed him before. It did now. He drove away knowing the distance between them wasn't measured in miles, but in truths spoken too late. Aaliyah slept for most of the day after that shift, the kind of sleep that pressed down on you like a hand. When she woke, the room was quiet. Too quiet. Evening light slid through the blinds of her apartment in Brooklyn, catching on the small things she'd collected over the years, photos taped to the fridge, a chipped mug from nursing school, a plant she kept forgetting to water. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel it. The disappointment, the relief, the anger that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with hope. She told herself she'd done the right thing. She always did. Grant spent the same hours pacing a penthouse that felt suddenly enormous. He replayed her words, not defensively this time, but honestly, pretending this is equal. He had lived his life assuming people adjusted to him. He had never learned how to step down without feeling like he was losing ground. His aunt called in the afternoon. Her voice was stronger. "You scared that nurse," she said plainly. "I didn't mean to." "I know. That's the problem." A pause. "If you want her, stop standing where it's safe for you." The words stayed with him. That evening, Aaliyah took a walk through the neighborhood, jacket pulled tight against the cooling air. Kids played on the sidewalk. Someone grilled somewhere nearby. Life, ordinary and persistent. She thought about the way Grant had held her without hesitation, about how careful he'd been after, about how easy it would be to disappear back into routine. Her phone buzzed. "I'm outside. I won't come up unless you want me to." She stopped walking. Grant stood across the street when she turned around, hands in his coat pockets, posture uncertain in a way that didn't match the man she'd seen in the hospital hallway. He hadn't sent a car. He hadn't made an announcement. He'd just shown up. "You don't have to do this," she said, as she crossed back toward him. "I know," he said. "I need to." They stood a few feet apart, the city breathing around them. "I'm not asking you to fit into my life," Grant continued. "I'm asking to learn yours. The parts I don't understand. The parts that scare me." Aaliyah searched his face. "And when it's inconvenient?" "I'll still be there," he said. "Not as a rescuer. As someone who stays." Silence stretched. She thought about how tired she was of carrying everything alone, how strength had cost her softness, how letting someone in felt like stepping off a ledge, and how being caught once had changed her. "Okay," she said quietly, "but we do this slow." Relief crossed his face, unguarded. "Slow is good." They walked together, not touching at first. Then, naturally, their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Weeks later, Grant's aunt was discharged. She hugged Aaliyah like family. Grant waited by the door, watching the nurse who had stopped being just a nurse to him. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale. Aaliyah still worked long shifts. Grant still traveled. But they learned the language of showing up, meals left in the fridge, late-night calls, quiet mornings. One night, months later, they sat on Aaliyah's couch, feet tangled, the city humming outside. "You know," she said, smiling, "you never let go." Grant squeezed her hand. "I never will." In Washington, D.C., where power changed hands every day, something steadier took root. Not because it was easy, but because two people chose to meet each other where they stood and stay. What would you rate this story from 0 to 10? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's build a global community rooted in kindness, love, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who would enjoy it too. Your support brings us closer to our 1K subscriber milestone and fuels our mission to create more emotional stories centered on resilience, healing, and Black excellence. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Your presence truly matters.